Good afternoon, everybody, and Happy New Year from all of us at the Mercury Chamber Orchestra. I am Brian Ritter. I'm the Executive Director for Mercury. And welcome to our virtual pre-concert talk, which features Greg Barnett from the Shepherd School of Music at Rice University. We're so pleased to have you with us this afternoon. We're very, very excited about our upcoming concert here on January 9th to start off the 2021 with some really extraordinary music by Beethoven, Debussy, and Shostakovich. And it's a real pleasure to turn it over to Greg to give us some insights about these wonderful pieces. Take it away, Greg.
Thank you, Brian. So what I'm showing you here is a portrait of Beethoven from around the time that he composed his late string quartets. Actually, the late string quartets are just a couple years after this, between 1825 and 1826. And the Grosse Fuge, the big fugue, is part of that late string quartet output of the mid-1820s, the very end of Beethoven's life and some of the last pieces that he composed. But as I was saying, what I'm showing you on the slide is a portrait from around that time and a quote not from around that time, but something that Beethoven said to a violinist he was closely connected with and who is closely connected with the great fugue and the late string quartets. The quote, "Do you really think that I worry about your miserable fiddle when the spirit speaks to me?" This was Beethoven's terse response to what comes across in history as a fairly gentle complaint on the part of the first violinist of the string quartet he was writing for. The violinist is Ignaz Schuppanzich, and Schuppanzich had a collaboration with Beethoven that goes back at least to the early 1790s. That is when Beethoven first came to Vienna, and all the way up to the end of Beethoven's life. Over 30 years collaboration. And this gets us started on one of two threads that I want to pursue today with each of the pieces on the program. One is to say a few things about the immediate context of the works, either information, remarks about commission, patronage, the musicians of the first performance, or, I think most important, the composer's goals or personal ambitions connected with each piece. So that's one thread that I'm pursuing. And Schuppanzich, the violinist, and the quartet in which he played gets us to the context for the great fugue, Opus 133. But the other thread that I'm going to pursue, and this I'll get to toward the latter part of my remarks, is about the music itself. Organization, coherence, the fact, as I mentioned in the program notes, that each of these pieces centers on a single idea. Now, that doesn't mean that the pieces exclude other ideas, that they're about just one thing, but rather there is a single idea that connects each of the three pieces on this program. And the transformations of that idea in its reappearances, the interactions with other musical motifs is something that I want to draw your attention to, but after talking a little bit about context. So in this array of pictures, I'm meaning to illustrate the situation of patronage in early 19th century Vienna, and Beethoven's situation in particular, and how a precedent of string quartet patronage established what looked to me like ideal conditions for Beethoven as a composer. Now, I'm talking about string quartets, even though you won't hear any string quartets on this program, because what you'll be hearing are string orchestra arrangements of what were originally string quartets. So I am going to focus then on the string quartet. And specifically, if you've come to earlier talks and heard me talk about the symphony as a genre, I've described the symphony as the largest, most public utterance in instrumental music that a composer could make between the late 18th and the early 20th centuries. Symphonies aspire to a kind of universality because the audience is large, the context is public. So whatever is being said in the symphony is meant to have a kind of universal appeal. The string quartet, on the other hand, as arguably the premier genre of chamber music, is aimed at a smaller audience in more intimate chamber circumstances. So what we often get out of sort of the mass of the repertory of chamber music and string quartets in particular is a sense of intense interaction between just a few players, the four players of the string instruments in the string quartet. So intense interaction and music that is often aimed at a more sophisticated audience. That is, the venue is smaller, the audience is smaller, and the audience usually reflects the situation of patronage, at least in the classical era. That is, those most interested in commissioning string quartets were sophisticated consumers of music, often musicians themselves. So the string quartet is aimed at real connoisseurs. And for that reason, what we get out of string quartets often includes, on the one hand, very personal, oftentimes emotional statements by the composer. In the case of the Shostakovich coming up, arguably autobiographical. But if not autobiographical or even particularly emotional, oftentimes we also get in the string quartet the sense of a composer taking on a personal musical challenge, that is, trying something out, setting a high compositional bar, and using the string quartet to leap over that high set bar. And both of these possibilities, whether deeply personal, autobiographical, or compositional challenge, we'll see both of these aspects in the pieces today. But in terms of the patronage, the portrait on the right-hand side, Prince, originally Count Andrei Razumovsky, then eventually Prince Andrei Razumovsky. I've put him here because first, he exemplifies the patron in early 19th century Vienna. Remember that Vienna is the imperial capital of the Austrian or Habsburg Empire. So it is filled not only with the Austrian aristocracy, but also international aristocracy, representatives of foreign countries. And that's exactly what Razumovsky was. He was the imperial Russian ambassador to Austria, and he was also wealthy and he was an accomplished violinist. So his musical interest, his wealth, led him to patronize a string quartet led by Schuppanzich, who, this violinist, had already had a standing relationship with Beethoven. And what this means is that Razumovsky is keeping a standing string quartet. It's his household quartet of professional level musicians who have this association with Beethoven. So what you have here is an opportunity for Beethoven to experiment with an established and supported group, an established and supported ongoing group of musicians forming this string quartet. It's like an ideal canvas for Beethoven to work with. And Razumovsky, if you've heard of this person's name, it's because he was the dedicatee of an important set of middle period Beethoven string quartets, his Opus 59. There were three of them. His Opus 59 string quartets were dedicated to Razumovsky. They were played by Schuppanzich. Not quite this ensemble, however. Schuppanzich, he first was patronized by a Prince Lichnowsky, another Viennese aristocrat and musically interested patron. And this went on in the early 1790s, and this is where Beethoven came into the picture. Then there was a reforming of the quartet under Schuppanzich, and this was between 1808 and 1814, and that's when they were working for Razumovsky. That came to an end. Razumovsky's wonderful palace in Vienna, which you're seeing a picture of down below, that caught fire at a very important party in 1814, and that sort of shut things down for Razumovsky as a patron. But I put him here in today's talk because of what he contributed to the establishment of the string quartet, to the professionalization of the ensemble by forming this sort of household ensemble of professionals and leaving it open for Beethoven to work with, to experiment with. That establishes, in my opinion, a very important precedent in the establishment, the standing of the string quartet as a compositional genre. This isn't the beginning of the string quartet by any means. Those of you who know the genre know that Mozart and Haydn contributed importantly to its establishment. And really the mutual homage between Mozart and Haydn, the mutual homage and competition between them centers on the string quartet, so they can be considered the first important chapter. Beethoven is the second important chapter, but he is contributing to the genre with this ideal collaboration of Viennese patrons like Razumovsky and musicians like the violinist Schuppanzich. So when Beethoven said earlier on, what should I care about your violin problems when the inspiration is speaking to me? That's what Beethoven was saying. I don't care about your technical problems. I've got ideas. Well, that seems rather rude treatment of someone who was so important to the development of the genre and to Beethoven's development. So that the late string quartets from 1825 and 1826, of which the Great Fugue is a part, these coincide with a third incarnation of a string quartet under this same violinist. He'd been in Russia for a number of years, but he came back to Vienna in 1823, and then acting on the commission of yet another Russian in Vienna. This is Nikolai Borisovich Golitsyn. He was the person who actually commissioned the late string quartets. But it's Schuppanzich again, who is the player, the collaborator with Beethoven. So he must have been a fantastically good player, because you'll hear in this great fugue just how virtuosic all four parts are. And it represents, as I say, the professionalization of the ensemble, and therefore the increased virtuosity that it could handle. And that too was made possible by these Viennese patrons. So Debussy's situation is a little bit different. The immediate circle around Debussy is illustrated in these pictures. For instance, Ernest Chausson is the dedicatee. He is the dedicatee because Debussy, he's a fellow composer. Debussy admired him, but he was also, Chausson, well established in Parisian music-making circles. He was the secretary of an organization, a kind of Parisian concert society known as the Société Nationale de Musique, a grand title, the National Society of Music, and was founded in 1871 under the motto, Ars Gallica, French art. So if you're getting a kind of nationalist sense or nationalist ambitions out of this Société Nationale, you're right on the mark. This period in French political and musical history is one that is dominated by an interaction with and a resistance to German influence, German musical influence, German political influence. 1871 is the year of the Franco-Prussian War. Germany is a burgeoning nation state, and it is also musically a dominant force in European music. And so the French are carving out their own national identity. And this is true of Russia in the late 19th century. This is true of Scandinavian countries in the late 19th century. And it's true even of the United States. That is, finding an independent, distinct musical voice in reaction to the dominant Germanic tradition. So the Société Nationale de Musique is an important chapter in late Romantic French music history. And as I said, Chausson is the secretary of this concert society. And this concert society was the venue for the premiere of the string quartet, Debussy's string quartet. You also see a portrait of Eugène Ysaÿe, the Belgian violinist who had his own quartet, and they were the performers at this. It was December 29, 1893. And in my search for images of the composer, Debussy, around the time of the composition of the string quartet, I got off the ever-abundant internet the picture at the bottom of the slide, Debussy playing for Chausson. Actually, Debussy is at the piano, if you recognize him. That's a young Debussy, he's in his early 30s at this time. The person turning the pages while Debussy is playing is Chausson. And this is at Chausson's house in front of members of Chausson's family. So there is a close association between Debussy and Chausson. But thinking more broadly about the string quartet and what Debussy is trying to accomplish, he is I make this argument in the program notes and with a good deal of musical detail if you want to sort of look further at this. But the general argument that I'd make is that Debussy is grappling with the Austro-Germanic tradition of writing works, abstract works, that is, non-programmatic works for instrumental ensemble. Debussy, a Frenchman, carving out his own territory as a composer, but also as a Frenchman, is grappling with the Austro-German tradition and making his own contribution to it. And this is not something we typically associate with Debussy. Instead, we think of him as a programmatic, poetic, evocative composer. There are extra musical images that often go with his music, but not in the case of the string quartet. So we see Debussy here attempting his own contribution, his own distinct contribution to what has been dominated, a tradition that has been dominated by Austrians and Germans between Haydn, Mozart, all the way up through Brahms, let's say. Then Shostakovich, thinking specifically of context and inspiration. As I did with the other two composers, I wanted to associate performers, the premier performers of the work, with the work itself. And Shostakovich, in this particular case, had a long-standing association. Since the 1930s, the late 1930s, Shostakovich had been writing for, experimenting with the Beethoven Quartet of the Soviet Union. The Beethoven Quartet itself was founded by what were originally students of the Moscow Conservatory in the 1920s. And this quartet existed for decades after that, through the late 1980s, not all with original members. But the photograph I hear with the quartet members is, as far as I can tell, the membership, the original membership of the quartet, which would have been the same members who would have premiered Shostakovich's Eighth String Quartet in 1960, the piece that you're going to hear in a 1967 arrangement for string orchestra. So these are the original performers. But one of the first things that you'll learn when you research Shostakovich's Eighth String Quartet is its close association in time, in sort of compositional circumstance, with a film score that Shostakovich had been commissioned to write. And the film is 5 Days, 5 Nights. It tells the story of the collaboration between Dresden, the German curators of great masterpieces, great artworks, the collaboration between these German curators and the Soviet military to save artworks in Dresden toward the end of the Second World War, and specifically in the disastrous aftermath of the Allied firebombing of Dresden in February 1945. So this movie, it came out in 1961. Shostakovich was working on a film score for this movie. I was tempted to play you some of the music, and you can find it easily on YouTube if you just open up your browser and run a search 5 Days, 5 Nights Shostakovich. You'll come up with a 5 Days, 5 Nights suite. I didn't find the music all of that compelling. So I left it off of my presentation today. If, however, you look it up and listen to it and find it fabulous and want to protest, by all means, contact me and let me know, and maybe I'll rethink it. But I mention all of this because one of the potential inspirations for Shostakovich's string quartet has been suggested as a sort of reliving of the memory, the horrors, the deprivations of the Second World War. That is, working on this commission, familiarizing himself with the devastation of 1945 Dresden, in a way, brought it all back for Shostakovich. And his string quartet was his private, uncommissioned reaction to those memories. That is one interpretation of the piece. Another interpretation will get us into the music. That is a more autobiographical interpretation. That is a work about Shostakovich himself, a commemoration of Shostakovich and his sufferings. That's another popular interpretation of the piece that has nothing to do with the movie. But for us to get further into that, we'll need to listen to a little bit of music. So I'm going to jump back to the Beethoven now that I'm on the musical thread of my remarks. What I'd like to do is sort of draw a line between all three of the pieces. As I said, each one focused on a single musical idea and the possibilities afforded by that idea over several sections or several movements in an instrumental genre, the string quartet. That's the thread that I want to draw out. And I think we'll find a closer connection between Beethoven and Debussy, just in the way that the composers are working. Specifically, the idea of sustaining a long piece of music with a single idea. What this involves is techniques of combination, combining the idea with other ideas, or weaving it into different kinds of musical texture. So, combinations. But a second technique would be development or variation technique. That is, taking that single idea and altering it over the course of the long piece. So those two basic techniques of combining the idea with other musical ideas or altering that idea in some way so that the single idea can sustain an entire piece. As I said, what we'll see is sort of three different approaches to this, and I think there is an interesting closeness between Beethoven and Debussy. But to give you an idea of how it works, the great fugue, the Grosse Fuge of Beethoven, fugues by their nature are imitative counterpoint based on a single idea. And that single idea is called the fugue subject. So what I'm going to do is play you the subject itself. Beethoven smacks you right between the eyes with the fugue subject played by everybody, all four string instruments together, the fugue subject. So let's hear it. Okay, so that's the fugue subject, and it's characterized by half steps. Half steps and ultimately a compass of an octave. So half-step relationships between pitches next to each other, that is, pitches very close, but the full subject covers an octave, a relatively large distance. So there are small intervals and big intervals, just to speak very broadly about this subject. And it's got that concluding trill. Okay, so in the next few excerpts, you'll hear that fugue subject combined with counter subjects. I mentioned imitative polyphony. So the idea is you introduce the subject in successive voices of the texture in among the four instruments. But then Beethoven is adding a second idea to the piece, and more than one second idea, as we'll hear. So here it is, combined with a dotted figure. And you heard the dotted idea in the violins. The fugue subject comes first in the viola, and then you heard the beginning of the cello taking it up. That is a standard fugal exposition, but it's against this dotted figure, so a counter subject. Well, before too long, we'll get a different counter subject. Triplets. Here it goes. And then Beethoven will bring both counter subjects back against the ongoing fugue subject. So you're going to listen in this next very short excerpt for three different things: the dotted figure of the first counter subject, the triplet of the second counter subject, and then that fugue subject, the main theme itself. These three things are being juggled all at once. And this is the technique of fugal composition, Grosse Fuge. Here goes. Now, if Beethoven had sort of wound up the movement after that much, we'd have on our hands a fugue as we understand the genre. That is, the working out of the contrapuntal possibilities offered by a fugue subject. But instead what he does is he creates a piece that lasts at least 16 minutes in length. That's a big, big fugue, in part because he goes on to create different movements out of this idea, with the subsequent movements introducing a new idea, but always against the fugue subject. I'll give you his slow movement incarnation or phase of this fugue. Here it goes. You'll hear a new melody, but then that fugue subject will be heard against it. Okay, so you can get a sense of how Beethoven is creating a multi-movement or really multi-sectional great fugue out of this single idea, mainly by exploring its combinations with other ideas. So with that in mind, I want to move on to Debussy to show some of the same techniques, and then maybe one more that Beethoven mastered, but I didn't actually play for you. So let me play you the main theme of the first movement. This main theme will come back throughout the successive movements, so it's a cyclic conception of the multi-movement string quartet. The word cyclic is what we use for a multi-movement piece that draws on the same theme throughout. Well, here's the theme itself from the first movement of the Debussy. That's not all of it, but that's enough of it. And there are two characteristics that I want to draw your attention to. First is the syncopation, bump, bum, that is accenting the usually weak beat, the second beat. 1, 2. Okay, so treating what is normally a weak beat as strong is an example of syncopation. And this whole string quartet is shot through with a heavily syncopated rhythmic style. And this is part of Debussy's emerging compositional voice, is this different musical style. And you hear it in the main theme of this piece. The other characteristic of the main theme is that decorative tail. Let me go back and play it again. It's often described as an arabesque, but after the bump, bum, you get a quick diddle-up, that arabesque tail. Listen for it this time. So the quick notes that follow the syncopation is what I'm referring to. So those two characteristics, let's say, will define the main theme itself. Now let me play you the main theme in an altered version in the second movement, scherzo, that is quick, dance-like or lively second movement. It's based on the same theme, but a slightly different profile. Here goes. Okay, it's that same theme from the first movement, but altered. It's now in this compound meter. He's disguised the syncopation, but you still have that arabesque, but it's in a different meter. It's the same melodic shape, but transformed rhythmically. Well, let's go to the finale then, and you'll hear the same basic idea transformed yet again. And this is Debussy's genius, his ability to transform the theme so that it can sustain the entire piece. It can sustain our interest throughout this more than 20-minute multi-movement work. Here goes. And if you weren't convinced, okay, I should have left a little bit more time so that I could get my thought out for you. I was about to say, if you're not convinced that that's related to the earlier theme, he keeps bringing back the motif or the general idea, making it clearer and clearer. In a way, in the finale, what you have is a kind of emergence of that main sustaining idea. It's a wonderful treatment that just hits the spot for the cyclic conception of the whole. But like the Grosse Fuge, it's relying on techniques of combination, the main theme with other ideas, and techniques of alteration. The Shostakovich, it's not last on the program, but I've saved it for last because it's a little bit different. It's similar in that we've got one main idea and its interaction with other ideas. But it's different from the Debussy, or Shostakovich's handling is different from the Debussy and the Beethoven, because that one idea is less changed. It's more stubborn. Specifically, it's stubborn in terms of the pitches. And it's very short. It's just 4 notes, as a matter of fact. And the 4 notes, the pitches are D, E flat, C, and B natural. Now that's significant. I rattled them off because this motto or motif, that is always those pitches, D, E flat, C, B natural. Well, it so happens that in German pitch nomenclature, that would be D, S, C, and then H. Their B natural is H. So if you're wondering what's B in German, that's B flat. So they give a different letter to B flat and B natural, whereas we just qualify B flat and B natural. In German nomenclature, B is B flat, H is B natural. And the significance of all of this is D, well, E flat is S, pronounced ES, or sometimes just the letter S is given for E flat. So it's either E, S, S for E flat, or just the letter S. So the sequence of letters, based on traditional German nomenclature, is D, S, C, H, to this 4-note motto. And it's Dmitri Shostakovich's musical signature. And this is where the autobiographical interpretation of his 8th string quartet, or this chamber symphony in C minor, this is where that idea comes from. The fact that the piece is shot through with this stubborn motto, a motto that is less changed than the fugue subject throughout the Grosse Fuge by Beethoven, or the main subject of Debussy's String Quartet number 1. In those cases, you have much transformation. In this particular case, you have less transformation, and that's the point. It functions as a motto, something distinct and recognizable and unchanging. Nonetheless, you have the motto in different tempos, combined with different ideas, as you do in the other pieces. And that's what I want to play for you in this last series of excerpts. So the initial presentation of the motto, it's first given to us in imitation between the members of the string quartet, and then all together. Here's what it sounds like: the D, E flat, C, B natural. Now together. Now in a scherzo. Finale. Okay, again, I should have left myself more time to interrupt my own excerpts. That sort of triple meter dance-like version, that was the 3rd movement allegretto, where he creates something of a scherzo out of the motto. Then the last excerpt that I played for you, you heard this jump, jump, jump. That is not the motto. It's a different theme. It takes on its prominence in the 4th movement, the Largo 4th movement, but then it kicks off, the motto and its interaction with a deeply mournful 4th movement melody. So what you get there is that unchanging motto. It's always those pitches. It's Shostakovich's signature, but in that last excerpt, it's interaction with other musical ideas. So that, in a way, is the musical technical theme of the entire program. Substantial works centering on a single idea, and compositional techniques for sustaining a substantial idea on the basis of a single idea. So that's where I'll conclude my remarks.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Greg, for your terrific insights. And thank you so much, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. We look forward to seeing you this Saturday, January 9th, whether you join us in person at the Wortham Center. And remember, right at this time, we are able to accommodate all Mercury subscribers who want to attend in person to join us. But otherwise, we look forward to seeing you from your very own living rooms as you view the concert from home. Thanks again, everybody. And Greg, many thanks. And we'll see you all again soon. Have a great afternoon.
Bye, everybody. Enjoy the show.